When the phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon, my son's voice sounded entirely too bright. Mark usually only called when he needed a favor, a babysitter, or a small loan he would conveniently forget to repay. This time, he was inviting me to dinner. Chloe and I are hosting a dinner this Thursday at the Sterling. Mark offered his tone practiced and smooth. We have a couple of important investors flying into town. We'd love for you to join us, Mom. Make it a family affair. In the background, I heard Chloe's voice sharp and thin. Tell her to wear something nice, not those gardening sweaters. I paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough for Mark to shift uncomfortably. I knew exactly what this was. I wasn't being invited as his mother. I was being positioned as a prop. Chloe wanted to present the image of a grounded, traditional family man to her wealthy investors. I was merely the elderly widow they could parade around to look wholesome. I still enjoy a good meal, Mark, I replied calmly. Great. The Sterling is pretty upscale, Mom. You don't have to worry about the bill, we've got it covered. He added, a hint of condescension slipping through, as if my entire existence was defined by the modest widow's pension he assumed I lived on. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at my garden. For years, I had quietly accepted their subtle disrespect. I kept the peace. I smiled through Chloe's backhanded compliments and Mark's passive negligence. But lately, my patience had worn thin. I was 64, healthy and entirely capable of standing my ground. I walked to my closet and pulled out a tailored charcoal dress I hadn't worn around them. It was simple, perfectly cut, and demanded respect. I knew exactly what the Sterling restaurant was like. I just didn't expect my son and daughter-in-law to choose that specific place to show off. Thursday evening arrived with a brisk chill in the air. I pinned my hair back with silent precision and clasped a simple pearl necklace around my throat. Looking in the mirror, I saw a woman who knew her own worth, even if her family had forgotten it. I grabbed my coat and drove downtown, arriving 15 minutes early. The Sterling was an exercise in understated elegance. Dark velvet booths, warm ambient lighting, and the low hum of jazz playing through the speakers. I took a seat near the entrance, ordering a sparkling water, and watched the dining room operate. Right on time, Mark and Chloe walked in, flanked by two men in expensive, flashy suits. Mark looked nervous, checking his watch, while Chloe scanned the room like she owned it. She wore a designer silk dress and carried a handbag that she made sure everyone noticed. When Mark spotted me, he waved us over. Chloe approached with a tight, practiced smile, kissing the air inches from my cheek. Xenia, you made it. Chloe noted, her eyes dragging up and down my outfit. That dress is very vintage. Did you find it in the attic? It serves its purpose, I answered, ignoring the bait. I glanced at the two men. Mark quickly introduced them as Greg and Tom, tech developers, looking to expand into commercial real estate. They offered polite nods, clearly uninterested in the elderly mother tagging along. The hostess led us to a prime table near the floor-to-ceiling windows. As we sat down, Chloe took charge, snapping her fingers lightly to get a busboy's attention. I frowned slightly at her rudeness, but stayed quiet. Don't worry about the menu. Xenia. Chloe leaned over, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. I'll order for you. I know menus with no dollar signs can be confusing for people on a fixed income. I placed my napkin on my lap, my expression completely neutral. Tonight was going to be very interesting. The waiter brought water and handed out the menus. Chloe immediately launched into a monologue about her recent trip to Napa Valley, making sure the investors knew exactly how much she spent on wine. Mark nodded along, playing the role of the supportive, successful husband. So, Xenia. Greg, one of the investors, asked politely, trying to include me. Are you retired? I am, I replied, taking a sip of water. I spend my time managing a few personal projects. Chloe let out a sharp, dismissive laugh. She gardens, Greg, and watches a lot of daytime television. Mark and I try to help her out when we can. You know how it is with the elderly holding on to those big empty houses while struggling with the utility bills. Mark looked down at his plate, saying nothing to defend me. It was a familiar pattern. He let Chloe control the narrative because it was easier than standing up to her. My house is quite manageable, I stated softly. The appetizers arrived: seared scallops with a citrus reduction and roasted bone marrow. Chloe made a show of explaining the dishes to me. The scallops are seafood zinnia. They might be a bit rich for your stomach, considering you usually eat those frozen microwave dinners, she mocked, glancing at the investors to see if they found her amusing. I picked up my fork, sliced a scallop perfectly, and took a bite. The sear is excellent, though the chef went slightly heavy on the tarragon in the reduction today. Chloe rolled her eyes. Oh, please. Like you would know the difference between tarragon and parsley. I didn't argue. I just kept eating. From across the dining room, I saw Julian, the general manager, walking the floor. He was impeccably dressed, his eyes scanning the tables. When he saw me, his step faltered for a fraction of a second. I gave him a barely perceptible shake of my head. Not yet. The dinner progressed, and Chloe's need to dominate the table only grew. She ordered a $300 bottle of wine without consulting anyone, making sure the waiter knew she expected the best vintage. Mark is doing incredibly well this quarter, Chloe boasted to Greg and Tom. We're actually looking at buying a second property. An investment home. That's great. Tom nodded. Real estate is always a solid move. Where are you looking? Well, Chloe smirked, swirling the wine in her glass. We were actually hoping Zinnia would finally see reason and downsize. That old house of hers is practically falling apart. If she sold it to us at a family discount, we could flip it. And we'd be generous enough to put her in a nice, budget-friendly retirement community. My grip on my water glass tightened, but my face remained a calm mask. They hadn't discussed this with me. Chloe was using a public audience to corner me into giving up the home I built with my late husband. My house is not for sale. I responded evenly, cutting through her laughter. And it certainly isn't falling apart. Mark cleared his throat. Mom, come on. We're just talking options. You have to admit, keeping up with the property taxes on your little pension is getting tough. My finances are none of your concern, Mark. Chloe scoffed, leaning back in her chair. Don't be stubborn, Zinnia. We all know Mark pays for your cell phone bill. If it weren't for us, you'd be clipping coupons just to buy groceries. I stared at her. It was true that Mark paid my phone bill $25 a month on a family plan. It was the only thing he had ever offered to do, and I accepted it years ago because I thought it was a sweet gesture of connection. I didn't realize it was a weapon they were keeping loaded. Julian passed by again. Our eyes locked. This time, I didn't shake my head. The main courses were served smoothly: duck confit wagyu steaks and a delicate truffle risotto. The investors were clearly enjoying the food, complimenting the restaurant's quality. It's truly a hidden gem, Chloe agreed, cutting into her steak. Though the prices keep out a certain demographic, which keeps the atmosphere elevated. She shot a pointed look at my risotto. Greg looked a bit uncomfortable with Chloe's constant jabs at me, but he stayed quiet, focused on the business deal. Mark was busy agreeing with everything Tom said, desperate for approval. I ate slowly, ignoring Chloe's attempts to provoke me. I had learned long ago that reacting emotionally only gave people like her power. Instead, I observed. I noticed the waitress forgetting to clear the bread plates on table 4. I saw the busboy rushing too fast near the kitchen doors. My mind cataloged everything. You know, Zinnia, Chloe started again, finishing her glass of wine. You really should let me take you shopping at some point. There are some great discount stores near the highway. You don't have to wear these dusty old dresses. It's embarrassing for Mark when we bring you out in public. Mark finally spoke up, though, weakly. Chloe, Leave it alone. Mom looks fine. I'm just being honest. She defended, crossing her arms. Someone has to tell her. She's living in a fantasy world if she thinks she fits in at a place like the Sterling. I placed my fork down, aligning it perfectly beside my knife. I reached into my purse, took out a $50 bill, and placed it on the table. "What's that for?" Mark asked, confused. "That should cover my share of the cell phone bill for the next 2 months," I answered calmly. "You won't need to worry about supporting me anymore." Chloe laughed out loud. "Oh, please. Put your little pocket money away, Zania. You're embarrassing yourself." The dessert menus arrived. Chloe waved them away immediately. "We'll just take the check," she told the waiter loudly. Then she turned to me, her lips curled into a cruel, triumphant smile. "You can't afford this place, Zania. Stick to diners from now on. We won't be bringing you to our business dinners anymore." I didn't blink. I folded my napkin and placed it on the table. "You are absolutely right, Chloe. I don't belong at this table." Before Chloe could deliver another insult, Julian, the general manager, stepped up to our table. He wasn't carrying a check. He stood tall, his posture flawless, and looked directly at me, completely ignoring Mark and Chloe. He bowed his head respectfully. "Welcome back, owner. Your private room is ready, Zania. Chef Marcus has prepared the new tasting menu for your approval." The silence that fell over the table was absolute. Chloe's hand jerked, knocking against her wine glass. The deep red liquid spilled across the white linen tablecloth, dripping onto her expensive silk dress. She didn't even notice. Her mouth was hanging open, her eyes darting between me and Julian. Mark looked like all the air had been punched out of his lungs. "Owner," he choked out. "Mom." What is he talking about? The investors. Greg and Tom suddenly sat up straighter, looking at me with a completely new level of respect. I stood up, smoothing the front of my charcoal dress. I looked down at my son and his wife. "When your father died, Mark, the life insurance wasn't much. You were too busy complaining about your inheritance to notice that I invested it. I bought this place when it was a failing diner. I scrubbed the floors, I built it." I turned to Julian. "Put their drinks on the house, Julian, but charge them full price for the meals. They clearly appreciate the elevated atmosphere." Leaving them in stunned silence, I walked away. I followed Julian past the bustling dining room, ignoring the feeling of Mark's bewildered stare burning into my back. We walked down a quiet, dimly lit hallway toward the back office. The noise of the restaurant faded, replaced by the comforting rhythmic sounds of the kitchen. Julian opened the door to my private office. Flawless timing, if I may say so, Zania. "Thank you, Julian." I couldn't listen to her talk about my microwave dinners. For one more second, I smiled, taking a seat at the heavy oak desk. A moment later, Chef Marcus knocked and entered, carrying a small tray with 2 new dessert concepts. He was a tall, heavily tattooed man who had been with me since the beginning. "Heard we had some trouble at table 4. Marcus grinned, setting the plates down. "Nothing I couldn't handle," I replied, picking up a spoon to taste a lemon basil tart. "This is excellent, Marcus. Keep the crust exactly like this." As I tasted the dessert, my mind drifted back to the early years. After my husband passed, Mark barely visited. He was obsessed with climbing the corporate ladder. I was left alone with a small life insurance payout and a massive void. Instead of shrinking into the background, I bought a bankrupt diner. For 5 years, I worked 16-hour days learning accounting at night, hiring the right people, and slowly transforming the space into the Sterling. I kept it a secret because I knew Mark. If he knew I had money, he would have demanded it for a startup, a car, or a down payment. I wanted something of my own, something nobody could take away or minimize. A sharp knock interrupted my thoughts. The office door opened, and Mark stood there, his face pale. his tie slightly loosened. He looked around the luxurious private office, taking in the framed awards on the wall. "Mom," he started, his voice shaking. "What is going on?" Mark stepped into the room, looking like a lost child. Julian moved to intercept him, but I raised a hand, signaling that it was fine. Julian and Marcus quietly exited, closing the door behind them. "Why didn't you tell me?" Mark demanded, his shock quickly turning into defensive anger. "Do you know how stupid I looked out there? Chloe is having a meltdown in the lobby, and the investors left without signing anything." I remained seated, leaning back in my chair. "I didn't tell you because I knew exactly how you would react. You would have wanted a piece of it without doing any of the work. I'm your son." He raised his voice. "You let Chloe pay for your dinners. You let me pay your phone bill. You sat there and acted poor." "I never acted poor, Mark," I corrected him sharply. "I lived modestly." "There is a difference. You and Chloe just assumed my worth was tied to my bank account. You treated me like a burden because you thought I had nothing to offer you financially." He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. He knew I was right. "You sat there tonight," I continued, my voice steady, "and let your wife humiliate me. You let her talk about putting me in a home and taking my house. You only respect me right now because you found out I own this restaurant." "That's not true," he muttered, looking at the floor. "It is," I said firmly. "I love you, Mark. But I will no longer be a prop in your life. I'm changing the locks on the house tomorrow. You and Chloe are no longer welcome to drop by unannounced." "Mom, you can't just cut us out over this." "I'm not cutting you out. I'm setting a boundary. You can leave now. I have a business to run." He stood there for a long moment, waiting for me to soften. When I didn't, he finally turned and walked out. The following days were remarkably quiet, yet intensely busy. I hired a locksmith the very next morning. When the heavy deadbolt clicked into place with a new set of keys, a profound weight lifted off my chest. My phone buzzed constantly. First, it was Mark sending long, rambling texts about how we needed to sit down and communicate. Then Chloe tried calling. When I didn't answer, she sent a sickeningly sweet voice message apologizing for the misunderstanding and suggesting we do a spa day. I didn't reply to either of them. I logged into my bank account and officially transferred the cell phone billing to my own name, cutting the final, tiny string they thought they held over me. Instead of dwelling on family drama, I channeled my energy into my real family, my staff, and my business. For months, I had been quietly scouting a second location across town. It was an old brick warehouse with high ceilings, perfect for a modern open kitchen concept. On Wednesday, I signed the lease. I walked through the dusty, empty space with Julian and Chef Marcus, unrolling blueprints onto a makeshift folding table. "We'll put the bar along the west wall," I instructed, tapping the paper. "And I want the kitchen completely visible. Transparency is going to be our theme here." Julian jotted down notes, smiling. "You seem lighter, Zania." "Different." "I dropped a lot of unnecessary baggage this week," I replied, looking out the large industrial windows. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for my son to validate my existence. I wasn't hoping for an invitation to a holiday dinner where I'd be seated at the edge of the table. I had built a fortress of my own making, using nothing but my own two hands, and a quiet, unbreakable resolve. I took out my phone, saw 3 new messages from Chloe, and calmly swiped to delete them all. 6 months later, the doors of the foundry opened to the public. The opening night was a symphony of clinking glasses, warm laughter, and the rich scent of wood-fired cuisine. The brick walls glowed under the amber lights, and the place was packed to capacity. I stood near the hostess stand, wearing a sharp navy blazer, watching the room operate with flawless precision. I didn't need to hide in the back anymore. I was the owner, front and center. A delivery boy walked through the front doors carrying a massive arrangement of white orchids. He handed them to the hostess. I walked over and pulled the small card from the envelope. "Congratulations on the new place. Let me know when you have time for a coffee." Mark, there was no mention of Chloe, no demands, just a cautious attempt to reach out. I folded the card and slipped it into my pocket. Maybe in a few months, I would agree to a 30-minute coffee, in a public place, on my terms. But there would be no instant forgiveness, and certainly no access to my finances. "Everything looks perfect, boss," Marcus said, stepping out of the kitchen and wiping his hands on his apron. "It does, Marcus," I agreed. I looked across the room at the people I had hired, trained, and supported. They respected me for my work, my fairness, and my strength. I didn't need to pretend to be a helpless old woman to make anyone else feel big. I walked over to the bar, ordered my usual sparkling water with a twist of lime, and raised the glass slightly to the room. I had lost a husband, and in many ways, I had lost the son I thought I raised. But standing in the center of the empire I built from scratch, I knew one thing for certain. I had finally found myself. If there's one thing Zania's story reminds us of, it's that your worth isn't defined by how others choose to see you, even if those people are family. You don't have to argue your value or beg for a seat at a table where you're not respected. Sometimes, the most powerful response to disrespect isn't a screaming match. It's simply staying quiet, building your own table, and letting your reality do the talking. Setting firm boundaries doesn't mean you lack love. It just means you finally respect yourself enough to stop accepting the bare minimum. It's a beautiful reminder that it is never too late to reinvent yourself and take back control of your own narrative. If you loved Zania's quiet strength and believe in the power of walking away from disrespect to build your own peace, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We share empowering stories just like this every single week. Drop a like and let me know down in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Zania's shoes at that dinner table? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.